Welcome to Engage Math, Lesson 27, Problem 1, and we are looking at quadratic functions and how to graph them. Keep in mind that a quadratic function has an x squared term as its highest degree term, and quadratic functions graph as what's called parabolas. At this point in your math career, they will either be opening up or down because they are in the form of y, which is the same as f of x, y equals x squared. So let's get started and figure out what these parabolas in these first two problems look like. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the values that have been recommended to us for x and put them in for x to find out what f of x is equal to. Keep in mind that f of x is the same as y. Okay, so we are going to start by, for this first one, we're going to say -2, and then instead of putting x, I'm going to put a -2 and square it. So this -2 right here is because we're substituting -2 in for x. So -2 squared, we do this first by order of operations. So we have -2 times a +4. So when x is -2, f of x is -8. All right, by the same rationale or by the same process, we will put -1 now in for the x. So I'm going to do one more, and then I'm going to kind of just go through the last few a little more quickly. But just to make sure you see what we're doing, we're saying -2 times -1 to the second power, because we're putting -1 in for x. We're substituting that in. -1 squared, that's our order of operation. That's going to come first. So we get a +1 times a -2, which is -2. All right, I'm going to kind of roll through the next few. When we put 0 in for x, it's -2 times 0 squared, which is 0. Then when you put 1 in for x, it's -2 times 1 squared. So it's really exactly like what we did when we put -1 in for x. So we're going to get the same y value, the same f of x of -2. And that's because whether you put a -1 in for x and square it or a +1 in for x, when you square it, you're going to get +1. And by the same process, when we put x's 2 in, we're going to get f of x is equal to a -8. So you'll start to see the symmetry of quadratic functions about the vertex. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so you can see this a little bit better for the graph now. So at this point, we're going to plot the point -2, -8 right here. We're going to plot the point -1, -2. We're going to plot the point 0, 0, 1, -2, and then 2, -8. And our graph is going to open downward because remember, it's going to be a U-shaped graph, so the vertex is at 0, 0. And that's our first graph. Let's look to the next one. Let's look to B, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit there so you can see that really clearly. Okay, so we're going to put -2 in again. I'm going to do the first two for you, and then we'll use the same logic that we did before. So we're going to put 3 times a -2 to the second minus 5. Again, we're going to do this first by order of operations. -2 squared is a +4. 3 times 4 is 12, minus 5 is going to be a +7. When we put -1 in, it's going to be 3 times -1 squared minus 5. -1 squared is a +1. 3 times 1 is going to be 3, minus 5 gives us a -2. 0 is always the easiest one to do. Not always, but a lot of times. So if we put 0 in for x, we're going to get this whole term to become 0. So we simply have -5 this time. So when x is 0, f of x or the y is -5. And then we know that if we put a +1 in, we're going to get the same f of x value that we got when we put a -1 in because it's being squared and will be positive. 1 in this case, and then 3 times 1 is 3, minus 5 is -2, and then I know this is going to be a 7. Okay, so now let's just plot our points at -2, +7. Okay, and then we have a point at -1, -2. Then we have a point at 0, -5. And then we know that about these other points, we're going to have symmetry about that vertex. And our graph is going to look, oh, sorry, let's redo that. Let's just make that look a little bit more like a parabola. So it should be a U-shaped graph. I know it's not perfectly going through those points, but you definitely see the idea that that's our vertex. Okay, great. All right, nice job. Let me zoom in so you can see everything together. And of course, as always, reach out with questions, and we'll see you next time at Engage Math.